I'm Kimberly Dark, and some of you know this already. I'm a writer and sociologist and storyteller, and I have some simple answers for your questions on social inequality. That's what we're doing here at the Hope Desk. I just want to remind you I don't have all the answers. I don't have the only right answers, but I'm going to spend up to an hour with you today and every month and do what we can to address a couple of issues each time. So today's topics are diets and billionaires. And why are we doing this? Because to me, it is hopeful if more people have at least thought about a topic enough to join in public conversations about that topic. And public conversations can be, at your dinner table, or they can be, in the grocery store, or at the city council. I don't know where you have public conversations, but it's worth thinking about where we decide to speak up and where we decide to hold back. So I am glad that you all are here. And I'm going to offer a couple of articles also before we're done today. But I'm not here to offer like in depth scholarship about these things. In many cases, I'm not the person best equipped to do that. But I'm going to do my best to keep this simple and yeah, we'll carry on. So, diets and billionaires. I thought these were two topics. The billionaire topic actually came up a few times in information that people request from me in the last few months. And I thought diets and billionaires would be great topics for the holidays because these are things that people like to talk about, right? Like billionaires are exciting and diets are horrifying, and people like to talk about both of those things quite a bit, especially because some folks feel like, oh, I've gained weight during the pandemic. What does it mean? It must be horrible. So I'm not sure which is best to start with, but I think I'm going to start with diets. I'm going to start with diets and just ask you, as I often do, to kind of like back up in your mind about this. And we think about we are animals, like we are human animals. And how do animals respond to food? Well, they eat it when it's available. That's the main thing, is that there is varying availability of food for most animals. And most humans live with, kind of a basic abundance of food. I mean, some of us live with like super abundance in the U.S. and Australia and the first world, but most folks live with a basic kind of abundance. There's another way that animals respond to food, and that is to store it if it's going to be scarce, like during the winter. Another way animals respond to food is to avoid it if it made them sick the last time. Right? So, avoidance and storing food and eating the food and adapting if the season changes, this is what we do. Okay, so we could just go period the end because we're actually human animals, and that's kind of the end of the story about how we interact with food. Except that we have created culture, and culture operates out there in the world and also informs how we behave. So, one of the things that Western civilization has created as a cultural standard is that it's really good. You have a lot of social capital if you're thin. Now, we could look at the whole history of this, and I think I talked a little bit about this in another episode of the Hope Desk a few weeks back, but understand that this whole focus on thinness arose in large part out of racism and the current desire to distance white bodies, white slender bodies, civilized bodies from everyone else. And so what that meant, of course, eugenics, when back when folks were back when those Europeans were trying to figure out how do we justify the horrible things we are doing through colonization, one of the things they came up with was, hey, um, there's a hierarchy of human beings, and we're at the top. What do you know? Isn't that funny? We discovered that. We're at the top, and everybody else forms a hierarchy on down. Blackness being at the bottom, the darkest skinned people. They also were looking at body differences, which, of course, this is an invention, right? Because you can find thinner people and fatter people in every continent on the planet, but they started looking at body differences. There was another thing that happened in the US. Even white folks who were immigrants, right, if they were coming from different parts of Europe, as they came and they were stigmatized for being immigrants, often in public depictions, those people were depicted as fatter. The women were depicted as fatter. And weirdly, even though immigrants are generally extremely hardworking people by virtue of their circumstance, the idea of being slow and lazy and gluttonous were all, mashed together. So, I'm telling you a little bit about how this cultural thing came to be because the desire to diet is not based on our human animal condition. It is based on culture. It is based on an idea that thinness is superior to fatness. So, y'all probably know that when it comes to height, there is kind of a bell curve where humans fall. There is like, average height, and then there's like, oh, super tall, super short. The same is true with weight. And sure, but people love to point to how that has changed over time. The idea that people are getting fatter as a population is true in many first world nations. And the assumption for why that is true is based on the eugenic idea that somehow thinness is superior. So we look at a population that is starting to weigh more, and we immediately go to, well, that must be because of depravity somehow. It must be because people are degenerate somehow, that they're overindulging, that they are, fill in the blank negative things. So this is tricky. It's tricky, right? It's tricky to think about, if I have a desire to lose weight, where did that desire come from? And I really am suggesting to you that any desire to diet is culturally influenced by this whole paradigm that says that fat people are slow and stupid and lazy and ugly and really should be eradicated. I mean, when you think about it, this is a eugenic concept. This is what we're saying. Like when Michelle Obama's up there talking about, we want to not have any more fat kids. What was that? Eat and move or something, live, and I forget what her campaign was called. Anyway, she's dancing with children. There's nothing wrong with dancing with the children and getting people interested in exercise. But I'm just saying, when you want to eradicate an entire group of people, that's eugenics, right? So here we are with the desire to diet. It's 2020, and lots of things have happened, particularly this year. I'm going to offer you an article that Emily will put in the chat box. That is an article that I wrote for Ms. Magazine. And it is about, like, what do you do about pandemic weight gain? And one of the things I'm suggesting you do is to celebrate you're alive, because actually, eating is one of the forms of comfort. And look, if you have a negative connotation with comfort, check that for a minute, right? Because what I really mean by comfort is an ability to calm the nervous system and be able to sleep well, right? These are tremendously important things for the human body: calm the nervous system and rest. And so food is one of the ways that we have to do that. But we have spent so much time trying to control food intake, we forget that actually food as a form of comfort is hardwired into our, human experience, right? Because the thing about being held close and fed, whether by breast or bottle, during your first year of life, right? Humans are very fragile during the first year of life, we're not very, like, we're kind of balls of dough when we come out. We're not like the giraffe that just is born and can run. And I don't know, we're not like that. So that whole thing about food and skin contact is hugely important to our well-being, our evolution. So I would suggest that, this business of, oh my God, I was at home. We've been at home forever, and the kids and I baked cake this afternoon and had cake for lunch. Um, you could just full stop right there and go, that was a good idea, right? What shows lack of restraint is talking for days about how fat you're getting, and how, cake is bad, and how, I've probably harmed the children, that, all of that. But the idea of we're going to cook together and eat together, that's actually, a health promoting activity. Okay. So dieting. Y'all already know that over time, there have been all kinds of different ways proposed to make the body smaller, to make the body weigh less. And even though you might be deeply into a certain way of doing that right this minute, surely you already know that every couple years or so there is a new way to, excitingly diminish the mass of the body. And we also know that things like keto, that's been recycled through different generations under different names. Things like intermittent fasting has been recycled under different names. So we're not really talking about new stuff. We are talking about ways that humans have invented to sell, so that you can feel that you're going to outsmart the body. Here's the good news: the body cannot be outsmarted. The body wants you to live. It wants you to survive no matter what is happening. So, thinking you can outsmart the body by, forcing it to be smaller, whatever size it happens to be, is probably going to backfire in a couple of ways. And so, first of all, the first thing is that it backfires because it doesn't work for very long. Um, the data on this mostly is focused on 5 to 10 pounds worth of weight loss is possible for everyone. I would say, because this has been, part of my experience. By the way, the reason that I'm even offering you my personal conjecture is that we don't have a lot of long term research on how weight cycling works. Why is that? Well, it's because, what we research is paid for by folks who are interested in continuing the panic over the obesity epidemic, and also the idea that we can, you know, pare down the body. So 5 to 10 pounds, I would say 30 pounds people lose and gain often, over and over again. But it doesn't stay off. And part of the reason for that is that the body experiences any lack of food as famine of some kind, right? Famine, like there's not enough berries to forage. There's not enough, on the hunt. There's not enough. We are still those animals. And our animal bodies do not discern between we can't get enough food and we are choosing not to eat enough food. The body doesn't know the difference between those things. And so there are mechanisms within the body that cause you to want more fatty, salty, sugary foods when there is weight loss. There's mechanisms in the body that cause you to want to eat more to replace. There's also mechanisms in the body that cause your body to conserve, to get very good at using very few calories to maintain the body weight you were at before the famine came. So this is also the reason that the majority of people who diet end up gaining that weight back plus a little bit more, because the body wants to live. It wants to live. And so if there's going to be a famine, you better stock up, right? Because the famine is coming again. And sure enough, actually, most people diet more than once. And so the famine is coming again. It is true that that voluntary famine is going to try and take you down once more. So the body cannot be outsmarted in these kind of ways. Now I realize there's a lot more to say about most of this, but I'm offering you the the survey course here. So um, that business of focusing on weight is not just ineffective at producing thinner, healthier bodies, but it also has unintended consequences as well. Um, the main one is food and body preoccupation. And I just want to say, this is not good for anyone to have huge groups of people, especially women, running around with a big old part of our brains devoted to food and body preoccupation. And let me just say, it's not a preoccupation with pleasure. It is a preoccupation with how horrible am I, right? So if we were preoccupied with, I don't know, good, interesting stuff, maybe I would feel differently about it. But this is not good or interesting. So this preoccupation with food and the body is harmful. There's also repeated cycles of weight loss and regain, and a distraction from other personal health goals and wider health determinants, things that might actually make us healthy, right? Like if you are focused on food and how much you hate your body all the time, chances are you are not maintaining a healthy emotional state, a healthy nervous system, healthy digestion. You might be maintaining healthy movement activity levels, but it might, your brain might have twisted that around to be in the service of weight loss. And so, that's taking a health promoting behavior and corrupting the joy that you might otherwise find in it. So, here's the other danger of diets: the social effects, right? So, some bodies are fat. Hey, check it out. I have one here. Here it is. Some bodies are fat. And when you participate in dieting, you are helping to build the culture that says that those bodies are inferior, right? So I want to just tell you, it is astonishing how embedded the idea that the idea that dieting is a personal, like weight loss and the body is personal to us, how embedded that is in our culture. So much so that people will say, now I'm just going to point out to you, I've been fat all my life. It's not like this, it's a new thing. So I've longitudinal data on this, um, that people will actually not think about it when they say, oh my God, I feel so fat, I want to die. Oh my God, if I looked like her, I would kill myself. Oh my God, I'm a terrible person. If I, oh, here's one my friend used to say: if you see me try to put any more food in my mouth, slap me. Right? Like people will literally say those things in my company while I am standing right there. I know they say them at other times. I mean, they have to, right? If they will also say those things in the company of a fat person. And I'll tell you what normally happens if you point out that, like, wow, if you think you're so fat, you should be killed. You must really be holding back and not murdering me. Right? And then there'll be this like cascade of shame that comes from having offended someone socially. This cascade of it's like, no, but you look great. It's just that I wouldn't look great if I looked like you. Right? So think this through. This is a tremendous social effect. So, really, what I am prompting you to consider here is the idea that your diet, your diet is harming me and everyone else you will ever meet. Your diet, at least to the extent that you talk about it, at least to the extent that you share your desire to lose weight. Now, I understand that there is tremendous stigma toward people who are fat. and that it is real, it is economic, it is social, it is healthcare, it is all of these things that we don't have as much access to. But in the quest to personally get those rewards, we reinstate those barriers for other people. This is how social world works, right? You can't have it both ways. You can't say this is important enough that I'm going to starve myself and that I'm going to attach my self-worth to this, and not have it influence the way other people are treated when they are fat. So, I've been talking for a while here, but I got just a couple other things to say. Because what if somebody says, "Oh my gosh, but I need to lose weight because, my knees, or gluten is bad for me." Okay, okay. So, if we are in a space where something is harming us, then it can be avoided. This is also a regular eating thing for all animals. If something harms you, you don't eat it. I want to just suggest, though, that when a food becomes unpopular, socially unpopular, more people will feel bad about eating it and will take that pain into their bodies. So, gluten, for instance, there are some people who are celiac who should not be eating gluten, and they get sick and they avoid it because they got sick last time. That is a totally normal animal response. We have ways of finding out now. Like, you might have symptoms that you might not understand were gluten intolerance, but you can get a test that says, "Oh yes, gluten is not for you." Great, science has helped you. Don't eat it. It's not good for you. But there are a lot of people who feel general upset when they eat gluten, and maybe what they're feeling is just the body digesting food. Maybe what they're feeling is poor digestion as a result of feeling bad about themselves for what they have eaten, right? That there are ways that our frame of mind influences how the body, um, well, does everything, but takes in food, digests food. Um, what we decide is bad for us is often culturally connected. Yeah. So sometimes this is tricky to sort out. I'm with you on that. But the main thing is, if dieting is something that you talk about often and is not related to the way the body feels, then that is a diet for cultural purposes. The idea that people need to lose weight because their joints, or because something like this, I'm going to suggest that this is also a plea for better health care for all bodies. Because right now, um, even though, let's say, a person has arthritis, as I do, um, let's say a fat person and a thin person both have knee pain because of arthritis, and they go to the doctor, they're going to be treated differently. And so I would suggest that, given the fact that diets don't actually work to diminish weight long term, that's not the right approach to trying to help someone who has a condition that also affects thinner people. So many ways to think about dieting. And the main one that I would love for you to consider is that it is a multi-billion-dollar industry that is trying to extract your time and money. And the more you perpetuate it by saying things like, "I feel so fat, I gained the COVID 20, I don't know," the more you do that, the more you are perpetuating the power that dieting has over us. Shall I ask you if you have questions now? I mean, I'm almost hesitant because this is a big topic and often people have a lot of questions. And I do still want to talk about billionaires. Do you have questions? If you do, you can unmute yourself and speak, or you can use the chat box and Emily will, read out your question. Oh, you also want me to talk about billionaires, don't you? Okay. We still have time here together, so, don't worry. If you have questions about diets that come up in the next half hour, we'll still get to them. All right. I just mentioned that the diet industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, but wow, I would like to talk to you about people who are billionaires, families who are billionaires, actual people. So, so where will we start? Let's back it up as usual. So you grow some fruit and bake a pie and sell it. Hey, you're not a capitalist yet. Do you understand that capital is money that is used to buy things in order to sell them again, specifically to create wealth? So, this is the thing that we are talking about here when we talk about billionaires is how much wealth is it reasonable for an individual to hold? Now, if you are in the United States, chances are you were raised with the idea that all of it is how much you should aspire to have. All of it, every single bit of it. Now, the trouble is, do I even have to say what the trouble is? I mean, no, I hope not, because obviously everyone needs to find a way to have a meaningful life and feed themselves and live indoors and wear clothes and do the things that we all do. So we cannot have everything owned by just a few people, and yet this is where we have been moving toward in the United States and also in a lot of places in the world um, that do not specifically strive for greater equality. So, how wealth is formed, and maybe importantly, how we have elevated its importance in the culture so dramatically, is really what we're talking about here. So, let's just think for a moment, how do people become filthy rich? So, there are lots of ways, and I'm just going to point out a few of them to you. Here's the one that we love to talk about. You can become filthy rich by inventing a thing that everyone wants, like Bill Gates, like Steve Jobs, like um, Tesla. Oh, no, wait, that was Edison, wasn't it, who decided that electricity should be monetized, not the actual inventor, Tesla. Who, see, this is interesting. Look at the story of Tesla and Edison and what happened there. But this is one way that people can become filthy rich is by inventing something that loads and loads of people want. Here's another way you can become filthy rich. You can exploit natural resources. So that's like, Rockefeller, Carnegie, these names in, U.S. richness that we all know from the past century. Exploiting natural resources is a way to do that. I just want to say briefly, most of us accept that certain natural resources are in the commons. That is, they should not be owned. Air is one of them, right? The ability to breathe. Now, I know there are troubles with this because some people breathe better air than others, but in general, um, air is something we've kind of decided should not be monetized. Hey, here's another one: water. Now, there are big corporations that have tried to monetize water and are still trying, and there have been lots of court cases about this, but in general people feel that air and water are part of the commons. What if we also felt that way about land? You can see that it is not a big leap. It is about mindset, right? And in previous times, certain civilizations have felt that land is part of the commons, part of what we have a responsibility to protect rather than what certain individuals can extract from. So, this is another way to become filthy rich is by exploiting natural resources. Here's another one: you can become filthy rich through celebrity. We all know that. You can also become filthy rich by inheritance. That's a really popular one in the United States. And I just want to point out that, you know what? The US is actually a really young country, not even 250 years old yet. And if you are filthy rich as a result of inheritance, that's because of slavery and genocide. Full stop. Full stop. That is not so many generations back in the US. In Europe, it's actually, there can be a long history of inherited wealth. But in the US, no, it is 100% genocide and slavery that caused that kind of wealth. So, it's possible to look at this a different way. Again, these are cultural mindsets about wealth that cause these kinds of gaps between rich and poor. You could look at that differently and say, like, that was just yesterday. Somebody should give some of that money back to those people who were wronged. So it's another cultural mindset. Hey, you can also get filthy rich, and this is the last one I'm going to mention. You could get filthy rich by manipulation of rules, by monopoly, and by exploitation of workers. This is the one that I'd like to talk about with regard to the existence of billionaires in today's world. So, do you know that there is income and wealth inequality in every nation in the world? There's nowhere that has total equality. So, I just like to mention that because often when I talk about this, especially in the US, there is this mindset that says, well, if you're not in favor of unfettered capitalism, everything else is communism and trying to equalize everything. And that's nonsense, of course. I mean, of course it's nonsense. How could it not be nonsense? There's so many examples worldwide of different ways that folks do capitalism. And so, yes, of course, that's not the case. But I just want to say there is not that kind of equality anywhere. And most of the time, a government puts limits on how much individuals can amass, either through taxes or by setting up rules and regulations about how profit needs to be shared. And this is a little bit different from setting up a minimum wage that you have to pay, but it is related. So if if there has to be some kind of way that good fortune in a company is shared among the people who work there as opposed to just going to the owners or the CEOs, then that's a different thing. So let me just say this real quick about the government setting these kind of rules. So look, if I am married and someone comes and murders my beloved, my spouse, I might have an urge for retribution. That would probably be one of the urges that is a natural human response to that happening. Now, I would be very grateful, however, if someone had the gentle hands to hold me back from doing that in the moment that I want to kill that person who murdered my beloved. I think that most of us understand that being held back from committing a murder is a good thing. And most of us would feel grateful if someone were able to do that for us, because part of what that would mean would be that in that moment I am restricted from murdering. I am also being held by a collective that says, no, no, that was wrong and you're better than that. And we're going to hold you through the grief rather than allow you to do something horrible. So, the same is true with laws that we put together for don't kill, right? The same is true with laws that we put together that say you don't exploit someone to the point where they cannot afford to live indoors and buy food and have a family. And this is exactly the system that we have currently in the United States, where minimum wage is so low that there are plenty of cities where a person can work a 40-hour work week and not come close to being able to afford housing and food. And part of the reason that these standards remain so low, and we already know things about, healthcare and things about retirement and things about, we already know those are things that are not provided. Family leave, right? Like we're the only, I think now we're the only, Australia is not so great either, actually, on family leave, but I think we're the only one left, first world nation left, that is not providing anything for family leave. So look, we already know about that stuff, but part of the reason that these policies remain as they do is because people with lots of money lobby politicians in order to make sure that their interests are protected. So, where are the gentle hands that cause a person to step back from this exploitation of others and be called into community? That is part of what, rules that say you can't pay somebody this little bit amount. You have to give them time off on the weekends. You have to allow them to have a family, right? This is part of what these rules do. And yet we have a cultural standard right now that tells us, fuck the rules. We don't want any rules. Nobody needs rules. We're going to manage just fine. So there's actually no example in history of large corporations that have chosen in favor of workers without rules. And, usually it's also unions that help people get those. And I believe in the US now, we are down to only 13% of workers are protected by unions. It might be 11 to 13. It's very low in the US. All right. So, um, all of this stuff is about cultural values. And so now is the time that I want to remind you there is a big difference between being filthy rich and being a billionaire. Like, I really encourage you to look up online. There are some great, like, Google this. There are some great visual representations of what does it mean to be a billionaire. Like, I think most people can't wrap their heads around the difference between a million and a billion. It is exponentially more. I mean, it is like a ridiculous, ridiculous amount more. So this is really what we're talking about. I'm suggesting to you that it is not a good idea to aspire to billionaire status. It is not a good idea, and I'm going to suggest to you some reasons why not. First of all, it is hoarding resources and power, and it is not just power in your community, it is political power, because we have, in the US at least, and a number of other nations do as well, we have a situation where politicians can be purchased, right, through um, special interests and through campaign contributions and all of this. And what we've got now is like a few hundred billionaires are actually in charge if they choose to be. And that is totally short circuiting democracy. Also, if you control politics, that means that you can advocate to pay people less and create circumstances that not only impoverish but disenfranchise workers. So I mentioned the difference between minimum wage and a living wage. So, for instance, I lived in San Diego for a long time, and back when I was working on this living wage issue in that city, which was, a decade back, I'm going to just say, um, the difference between the minimum wage and the living wage was about $11 an hour. That was the difference, right? And so, what are we doing when we know that it costs a certain amount to live indoors and buy food and all of this? And we are allowing corporations to pay people less, even as they get richer and richer. So, the gap between the two is actually paid by taxpayers. This is the other problem with billionaires, is that they are mooching off of the government and everyone else. So how does that happen? If you work at Walmart, Walmart has been, held up a lot, but the same could be true for any low wage job. Chances are you might also be eligible for food stamps because you don't earn enough to get by. If you've got a family, chances are you might also be eligible for WIC, women, infants, and children food subsidies. There are things that the government will do. Precious few of them, I want to add. It's a diminishing amount of things that the government will do for you. But there are things that the government will do, even if you are working 40 hours a week, right? Even if you are a worker. So basically, Walmart is the beneficiary of that government subsidy because it is keeping you available to get dressed in the morning and go back to work for them. They are not paying enough for you to live on, though. So they're taking the benefit for themselves. All right. There's also the issue of intergenerational wealth. Um, and these wealth inequalities that I've already mentioned are based on slavery and uh, theft and exploitation. But the reason that it's not shouldn't be a good thing to aspire to being a billionaire is that the ability to profit on inherited wealth, right? That ability is, you know, that is not something that we should be choosing for. It is extending forward the effects of um, slavery and genocide. Also, I want to point out that philanthropy by itself is not the answer. Now, Bill Gates and what's his name, Warren Buffett, got together a few years ago and decided, yeah, we got billions of dollars and we're going to try and give back. Well, part of the issue with this is that it leaves structures unchanged. It still leaves the power with them, the power to give or not give, rather than democratizing that power and, thinking again about what is actually part of the commons. And I would just suggest that, how do we change the thinking for this? Okay, you might know this story about Henry Ford, who made cars, and his idea for the people who worked in his factory back then was that he wanted the people who worked in the factory to make enough money to buy his damn cars because he was selling cars, right? And his thinking was, how is this good for me if I have a product to sell and the people who work for me can't even buy it? So he was out not advertising, advocating. He was out advocating for everyone to have enough income to be able to afford an automobile. Now, you can see how that is still a self serving mindset, but it is actually a great mindset when we start to think about how functional capitalism might work. So it's possible to be against capitalism entirely, but I'm talking about functional capitalism here. And I think that part of what that means is that we strategize for less debt, especially for things like education, medical care, and housing. Housing, I know that is not a popular one to add in there, but I think that those three things, if we strategize for having less debt for those things, that's going to be great. I'm also in favor of more millionaires. No billionaires, but more millionaires. So check it out. A lot of times when we talk about social equality, we talk about the Scandinavian countries. Now, I love me some Sweden. I'm not just, I think we should talk about the Scandinavian countries, but Japan is actually a better comparison point because excuse me, those Scandinavian countries, a lot of them are under 10 million people. Japan is more like, 140, 150 million people. It is easier to think about, scale with this kind of comparison. Um, there's nearly half the population in Japan. I believe it's like 47% of the population has in savings between 100,000 and $1 million, equivalent to yen. That's translated over. So think about that for a moment. In the United States, fully a third of the population has a negative net worth. That is more debt than wealth, right? What would that mean if half the population had between 100,000 and $1 million in assets that they could, in net worth, in wealth? What would that mean? Well, it would be a very different economy. So, yes, I am offering to you this whole um, diatribe on billionaires in order to say we have to do something to change the way that we idolize the rich and assume that the poor are stupid and lazy. That is a shift. And here's how that looks in our daily lives, that that we stop acting like luxury goods are somehow superior, first of all, and worthy of striving for. Yeah. So like all of those like fancy handbag companies, like people who spend $1,000 on a purse, right? They're marketing to the very rich, but their actual biggest market is the middle class. People who, like Cardi B has got, when she gets on her video with I love Cardi B. Have you watched Cardi B? Okay. When she gets on and starts talking about her purses and she's got like that whole closet full of $1,000 purses, that's one market for the Gucci company. But their bigger market actually are all of the people who aspire to own one of those purses, or maybe three, right? So we can change the way we think about wealth and luxury and also start talking about the commons. I would love it if we had more conversations about what does it mean to actually care for one another and, you know, talk about the commons. All right. If you have questions for me, you can ask them. And I also will ask the question that I always ask you, which is, do you feel like there is anywhere that you might discuss some of these things? Oh, yes, yes. And Emily can give you the other articles. I gave you an article. Hey, I gave you an article about how billionaires are getting richer during the pandemic. And I just want to point out it's written by Chuck Collins. And if this is a topic you want to know more about, equality and wealth, read everything by Chuck Collins. That would be a good start. And then there's also another article, more of a research article about how diets don't work. What do you got to say?
See, Claire put a question in chat. Is a wealth tax the only approach to decreasing the number of billionaires?
I
Asks
don't think
Claire.
so. I don't think a wealth tax is the only way to do that. I think that raising the floor on the folks at the bottom is the way to do that. And, if, for instance, there used to be a situation, I'm not sure if this is still the case, but there used to be a situation in Japan, the comparison country that I was thinking about before we did this call, where a CEO could only earn like, I don't know, 23 times, I'm making up a number here, but it's could only earn like 23 times the amount of the lowest paid employee in that company. Think about what this means. That means, like, if that company is Apple, that means that everyone who works at Apple becomes extremely wealthy as the profits go up. The person at the top is still crazy wealthy, more wealthy than anyone else, but the tide rises all ships, right? And in the US, it is often more than 200 times the amount that is earned by the lower employees. So don't think wealth tax is the only thing. I think raising the floor on the lowest level is hugely significant. See, the thing is, I think we need these kind of rules that don't take anything from somebody, but actually um, reimagine so that you just don't ever get a billionaire. right? That you got people who are crazy stinking rich, but you don't ever, it's not ever going to get to that point. To my mind, getting to that point is that's a failure. That is a failure of every system that we have. And he's Bezos is he's on track within his lifetime to be the world's first trillionaire. That should never happen, right? That's back to, somebody owns all the air and the water and the land and decides how you get to live on it.
There's another question in chat from Lizzie.
Do tell.
Do you foresee reparations being a factor in the future?
Reparations regarding slavery? Yeah.
Lizzie, you can. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Um, I foresee that we are going to have those public conversations. I don't know what's going to happen as a result. But I think, for such a young nation to keep refusing to handle its very short history is bizarre and unprecedented, right? Most other nations that the UK colonized, at least, most of those nations have at least begun to have conversation. Now, Australia is a terribly racist place, right? But they at least are having these conversations about, oh fuck, that was really wrong what we did when we said this was a blank slate and there was nobody here, no humans were on this land. That was really wrong, right? We have not even gotten to that point yet in the US to say things like, yeah, Thanksgiving, that holiday that we just celebrated, that still what we are teaching in public schools is, is all about those pilgrims as really nice people. And so we have not even gotten to that point yet. So yes, I do think we're going to end up talking about reparations. I don't know what's going to happen as a result of those conversations. I'm in favor of reparations. I'm in favor of, when you think about the fact that when slavery was ended, which is really not very long ago, the
Yeah.
US government offered reparations to slave owners for the human property that they lost. At the same time that white people were given 40 acres and a mule to settle. Let's just start there. How about just that? How about every black person in America gets 40 acres and a mule? I'm not sure where we're going to get all those mules, but we could start there. There could be some kind of, I don't know, mule, army of dancing mules. Maybe somebody could teach the mules to do something interesting. I just think start there.
There is there's a group, I was just looking at it last night. There's a group called Coming to the Table, which is about all different colored people coming together and talking about this. And they have a toolkit for thinking about and talking about and working on reparations.
Beautiful. Beth, do you have that resource? Like you could put it in the chat box?
I can try.
Okay, thank you. What else? We got a few minutes left. Does anybody see a way to have conversations about these things in your regular lives? Oh, something else in the chat. It's good to be reminded how young our countries are. Yeah, yeah. It feels hopeful that we could get on these issues. I'm with you on this, and I think part of the reason I'm here with you now is because, during this strange year of 2020, I felt I needed some more hope. I felt I needed some more sense that, oh, we actually have the tools to discuss and handle a lot more than we think, right? And I mean, we're handling all kinds of weird, interesting things in 2020. In, you know, in like literally our individual lives have changed, but that means that our collective lives are changing too. And so we can do it. We can do it. Thank you for that link on the
Oh,
coming to the table.
Beth, you sent that to me as a direct
Beautiful.
message, I think, by accident. So I just pasted it in chat so everyone could see it.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks so much, folks. This video will be posted along with the others, you know, as soon as somebody other than me can do that. And thank you, Emily, for being our facilitator again. And I'll see y'all next month, I hope.